Now, the ANC says it's well on its way to reducing the country's high cost of living. The governing party seeks to do this by expanding the indigent program and not increasing the general fuel levy, among other measures. Let's discuss this with the ANC's chairperson for the Social Transformation Committee, Dr. Zweli Mkhize. Kabazela, good evening, and thank you very much for coming on and joining us this evening here on In Focus. So, a quick glance at this priority 3 and a glance of what other countries have done to deal with the issue of high cost of living. It's almost textbook. It's almost like a cut and paste kind of situation where you deal with taxes, so you deal with VAT, you deal with energy costs, you deal with transport costs. You extend the social safety benefits, barring, of course, a few other things which we will touch on. Is this, again, a one-size-fits-all kind of approach that has not taken into consideration the kind of unique challenges that we would be facing in South Africa?
I think the formula for dealing with the high cost of living should have an aspect which is generic across different countries. Then, of course, we have to go a little bit more specific into our own situation. The starting point is that this one is not on its own the only priority we're focusing on. We're looking at the issue of jobs. We're looking at the creation of building the economy, in particular building industrialization. Now, in the context of that, we have to now deal with this on a basis of its the crisis nature that it is. Cost of food, the cost of living, cost of fuel is all quite unaffordable, and therefore we have to start looking at the VAT exemptions and then relook at the list that we're dealing with, focusing on the staple food, the source of carbohydrates, the source of proteins for most of the households, and therefore revise that list to benefit particularly the poor, who will be hard hit by this. Then linked to then we have to start looking at various other issues. We have the issue of the cost of traveling is what also takes a lot from the people's income, and it has to be revised. Particularly, you have got subsidies that go to taxis and buses. Now, those need to be relooked at so that they must actually have an impact in the lives of people. You've also got the issues of the minimum wage, which has to also take into account the fact that there's inflation, and therefore it needs to be, adjusted in a way. And in addition to all of this, there is also the problems of price fixing, where some of the cartels work together to push the prices of food up, particularly food and other commodities. We've seen the Competition Commission has had to deal with the price of bread in the past. And so these again have to be dealt with together as a basket of things that have to be dealt with. There has been discussions several times in the National Executive Committee around the fuel levy. And again, we know that this has a bit of a tricky one because it becomes part of the tax regime of the country. But those discussions mean that we will have to look at everything, a kind of comprehensive look into what can be done to assist to deal with the cost of living.
So let's go a little bit then step by step onto those issues. Building a resilient economy that is resilient to external shocks and to inflationary pressures, as you put it. One of the issues that people have raised, and is an issue that you have a challenge with the ANC, because at some point you've got to maintain the independence of the Reserve Bank. And there are others who've been saying, well, you need to change the mandate of the Reserve Bank to include that of job creation. And there are some, in fact, within your organization who are saying, no, nationalize the Reserve Bank. The question is, how do you build that resilience when you have a Reserve Bank that continues to raise interest rates at a pace that is quite unseen, I suppose, in the history because of the challenges that we are facing globally in terms of the economy? So they are raising them quickly, but also they are keeping them very high for longer, which in itself is going to counter the efforts that you are trying to do to reduce the high cost of living?
Yes, look, there have been all these conversations, and at the end of the day, it will be after we've gone through and discussed together on a number of these aspects to see how best we can actually get the Reserve Bank to be helpful. Because there are many who are arguing that if the Reserve Bank does not take into account the issues of the poverty levels, the issues of job creation, it makes it difficult for their interventions to help the country, but they can deal with the costs, the cost of capital, interest rates, and so on. But it does not deal with the problems which is faced by the majority of levels of poverty. So whenever we have to look at the interest rates, it does require us to understand that there is a whole top-down process that will ultimately hit the low-income earners, the consumers on the ground are going to be ultimately affected by all of this. Now, if there's no balance on the one side to actually deal with the revenue, so that their income also, can be balanced, and also the shocks that are coming with the increased interest rates are not mitigated, then it does become a problem. So that conversation has to continue until we can find a way out of this. But on the other hand, we need to also look at the question of some of the gaps. If there is no mechanism to help the middle and low income, groups, so that they can actually are able to participate in the generation of their own wealth, creating small businesses, creating cooperatives, building their own asset base as well. That is an issue that I think we have not been able to get right up to now. Yeah. And therefore, part of what the manifesto is looking at is how do we ensure that, we have, financial reforms that, help the lower income groups to be able to have access to, manageable capital loans that can be, made available to them so that they can build their own assets and build the economy at a different level. Now, most of the, particularly the black majority, were completely excluded from participating in business activities. It was by law many years back, and therefore you need to actually have a bridging or, a buffer kind of finances are available to help build small businesses, at a township level, at the rural, business level, so that people can, on their own, broaden the base of participating traders and, business and industrialists. That, I believe, it needs to be done as a kind of a balance between the two. So you can't also impose on those, low-income groups, the same kind of interest rates that are making it difficult for them to cope otherwise, but then you actually want to burden them with that when they're supposed to build. So there needs to be a sympathetic approach to building small business based to small cooperatives and so on, including even government, using their procurement leveraging power to actually give access to the various small businesses to do business with government, and also prevail on big business to also do business with small businesses as well, because it must be a support that you must give from both the private and public sector. If you look through India, at the beginning of their journey into democracy, they had over 1,000 items that were actually identified as government having to procure from the small businesses. Now I'm told the number would have come down to about 300, which means therefore that they've built some degree of resilience on the local, industries where people can trade with government, and at the same time they must also have easy access to what I can say cheaper capital to deal with the problem of rebuilding the economy.
Absolutely. Let's have a question of cheaper capital. I'll press you on a little bit on it because I want you to simplify it for somebody in Mkhize. I believe you've been somewhat deployed in KwaZulu-Natal to help improve the fate of the ANC in that province. And the word around is the ANC is afraid of financial institutions. Niyabasaba ongqowana, you don't deal with it. How do you explain to that person to say the banks profit from this trend of rising interest rates and the Reserve Bank is supporting that? How does then the ANC come to explain to us to say, no, but we are dealing with the cost of living, but you can't, as you put it, deal with this issue of the ability to borrow becomes impeached by the fact that it's costly. So businesses don't start, companies don't expand because it's just expensive to go and borrow money.
Look, I think it's going to be a long journey. Part of the journey has also got to have a degree of courage from the point of view of the government, so that, that area is an area of an ongoing bargaining relationship where government has to, stand their ground and also push as much as possible for the benefit of the disadvantaged communities. It has to be like that, and there's no way of running away from that. Now, you'll also notice that during the COVID times, to get the SRD going and some of the provisions that had to be done at that point to help fund, particularly people who had closed down their businesses, there had to be a conversation with the Reserve Bank to say, look, the country has never been in this kind of situation before. We need the Reserve Bank to have an understanding that we need to mobilize additional resources that must actually help the community, the whole country, to cope with a crisis which we're all facing. Now, I think that the poverty levels, the cost of living, all of these issues are crises that we need, a firm conversation between the government and the Reserve Bank. I would say that to get to that point, I don't believe that everyone would have to stay in their own comfort zones. There have been a number of issues raised with the banks sometime, even as we're hearing about the whole problem of currency speculation, where there was a manipulation of the currency. Now, you don't let those issues go easily. Everyone needs to understand that we have the responsibility to build an economy, to build a country, but you need both of us, both government, public sector, and private sector, to work as partners. So some of those will not be comfortable conversations, but they have to be held. And I think that if you look back over the past 30 years, we've had a very strong focus on really entrenching, more the political rights issues, the votes and everything. But the issue of the economic weaknesses of our system are beginning to catch up with us. The base with which we got into the economy when we moved over from apartheid to where we are is still too narrow to be able to carry a democratic dispensation where there are lots of aspirations. If you go out to the various communities, excuse me, if you go out to the various communities, the issues, people have got the, subsidized houses, they've seen the roads, they've seen the schools, they've got, free education in some of the grades, depending on the quantities and everything. But people are still saying, look, we are not happy. And part of the reason is the level of job creation in the country, but it also the fact that you can get so much from government, which is, I think, justifiable. Beyond that point, you need to work your own income to actually, buy your television screen, so to buy your own car, to actually expand your house and so on. Now, all of those cannot be expanded on the basis of looking at the government grants. They have to be expanded on the basis of each individual now bringing in their own innovation, their own energy, and creativity to build their own wealth. And in the process, then, of course, they can meet the aspirations which the government will not be able to. But in the process, the environment that government must create must be such that there is access to finance, there's also access to markets, there's also, leveraging on the power of government and big business to procure, and therefore support smaller businesses, and that must cover the gap. Now in South Africa, you're either very poor, a very low income, and then the others are, much better off. Now we need to build in between, like we've seen some of the developing countries such as India, as I was quoting.